Yeah, there we go. Okay, so good evening, everybody. Welcome back to Kabbalah Decoded. Tonight, we are going to be looking at the fourth Tikun in Tikunei Zohar. Now, Tikunei Zohar is a work which was written by Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, as I've mentioned before. That is the Orthodox belief, and there's very reasonable proof for it, which I accept, despite the academics' misgivings. And it is well known in religious Jewish circles that there has always been an inner dimension of the Torah which was taught and eventually was written down. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, there's many other works and so on and so forth. In any event, this work called the Tikunei Zohar is part of the Zohar corpus, but it talks about one word and one word only, the word Bereshit. The word Bereshit in Hebrew can be written. I've written the two letters here in red, as you can see. Obviously, in the Torah, it's not written. This is the first word of the Torah, the first word of the Bible, Bereshit, in the beginning, or as the Zohar itself says, with the beginning. In any event, let's not discuss that now. The word Bereshit is parsed in 70 different ways in this book called the Tikunei Zohar. So there's 70 Tikunim. And of these 70 Tikunim, they all explain this word Bereshit, but with different permutations. Last week, we learned this permutation. That was one word, and the rest of the letters formed another word, Rosh Bayit, the head of the household. Not last week, the last time we learned together. Rosh Bayit, the head of the household. And there's a video which is on my website and on YouTube, on our channel, Kabbalah Decoded channel, where you'll be able to find that if anyone didn't see it. This week we're going to be talking about a different permutation, a permutation which is called Roshi Bat. As you can see, these two letters, the two outside letters, form one word, Bat, which means a daughter. It also means other things, as I will explain shortly. And Roshi means essentially my head. All right, so we have to understand what this phrase then altogether means. Roshi Bat, my head, daughter. What on earth is that all about? So, in order to be able to explain that, so I will have to go into the actual wording of the Zohar itself. Now, the Zohar starts off talking about things which, at first glance, don't seem to have anything to do with this particular permutation, but in fact they do, as we will see shortly. Okay, so I'm just going to read from the original Aramaic and Hebrew and just translate as I go. I won't read out the Aramaic and the Hebrew. Not sure that anyone here knows Aramaic, but so it's no point in reading it. But basically, this is what it says in English. The fourth Tikun, the word Bereshit, because all the Tikunim on the word Bereshit again. It is written, this is what the Tikunei Zohar says. It is written, open up for me the gates of righteousness, called Sharei Tzedek in Hebrew, Avovam. I will go through them, or Ka, and I will praise God. Again, open for me the gates of wisdom. I will go through them, and I will acknowledge or praise God. Now, this is actually a very fundamental verse, because what it's really talking about is we have to understand what the gates of righteousness are. Sharei Tzedek, the gates of righteousness, through which we pass, and then we're able to acknowledge and to recognize and to give praise to God. So, and who's supposed to open these gates? Pischu li Sharei Tzedek, open up the gates for me. So this is what the Zohar, this is the way the Zohar interprets it. Now, the interpretation, one of the interpretations, the simple, straightforward explanation, is that King David, who is the author of the Psalms, is saying, open up for me the gates of righteousness. These were the gates to the Temple Mount. Open up the gates of righteousness, because the temple was a place of righteousness. That was what it was all about. It was all about being righteous. In fact, interestingly enough, the high priest, the Kohen Gadol, the high priest, if he was not worthy, would sometimes have to be dragged out of the Holy of Holies on the holiest day of the year. He only went into the Holy of Holies once a year on the day of Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement. And if he was not worthy of going to such a holy place, he would not survive, and he would have to have a rope tied around his leg so they could pull him out of there, because no one else was allowed to go in to the Holy of Holies except the high priest, to pull him out by his foot. So, which had a rope tied around it. So, open up for me the gates of righteousness. The gates of righteousness, again, is the gates of the temple, and I will walk through them in order to praise God, because that was what the service in the temple was all about. However, the Zohar doesn't interpret it according to the simple and straightforward explanation. The Zohar, as usual, interprets it very, very differently. The Zohar says like this: open up for me. These are the two eyelids, afapei ha'ayin, the two eyelids, which open and close. Right? They're open and closed, because you blink when you blink, they close, and when you go to sleep, they close generally. Regarding which, the Zohar continues, regarding which it says, these are the keruvim, the cherubim, the angels, who spread out their wings from above. In other words, the angels that spread out their wings to protect the holy ark, above the ark, the holy ark, those are the eyelids. The eyelids are compared to angels. So says the Zohar, it continues, these angels, these cherubs are, what's a cherub? A cherub is an angel which looks like a young child, right? Keruvim. There's different types of different categories of angels, and this particular type of angel had the appearance of youth. Two young children, these two angels. On top of the ark, there was a likeness of two angels generally looking towards each other, as we'll see shortly. So these keruvim, these cherubs, Elu shnei keruvei ha'ayin, these are two, sorry, I'm reading it out loud. These are the two angels of the eye. Now let's explain what that means. The angels of the eye doesn't mean some mystical kind of third eye idea. What it is quite simple. They are spreading out their wings, which are the eyelids, and when a person closes his eyes to the wrong things and opens his eyes to the right things, then they are called gates of righteousness. When you allow yourself to see only that which is positive, that which is worthy, that which is holy, but you close to your eyes to things which are unholy, things which are not good, and things which are critical and negative, those are, that's the way you're supposed to use your eyes. So the angels which protect the holy ark, in other words, the angels which protect your mind, your brain, your thinking processes, and ultimately, therefore, your soul, are the eyelids. So, he continues and he says like this. Furthermore, when it says open up the gates of righteousness, which the verse started off with, these are the gates of righteousness, or the righteousness are the two eyes. When they look straight forward, in other words, not the direction they're looking in, but when they look at things which are yashar, things which are straightforward, things which are not bent out of shape. In other words, things which are good and proper. Then it says, regarding these angels, that they look at each other face to face. These two angels look at each other face to face. In other words, they're in a state of harmony. They're in a state of communication one to the other. But at the time when they do not look in a straightforward way, in other words, they look at the wrong kinds of things. They look at things that are metaphorically bent out of shape. In other words, they look at things that they're not supposed to look at. Then it states, this is continuing the Zohar, there is a this is, says the Zohar, this is the wily or the crafty snake. When you look at things you're not supposed to look at, that's the crafty snake. In other words, that's the power of evil. Regarding which it says, and death separates them. In other words, when one looks at the wrong kinds of things, then one incurs a certain amount of death. Now, death to us is generally a final situation, a final thing. Obviously, that would be true in the literal sense. However, death doesn't necessarily mean immediate death. Death can also be by, so to speak, 1,000 cuts, right? What does that mean? Generally, the soul is connected to our Creator, connected to God. The soul is connected to God. And it's connected to God by a number of different strands of a rope, so to speak. If the rope is connected up above and the rope is connected down below, in other words, this connection between God and the soul is comprised of several strands. If one cuts just one strand of the rope, you don't really notice, even though the rope is a little bit weaker, you don't really notice it because there's many other strands. But through malpractice, and this is not medical malpractice or legal malpractice, it's just practicing the wrong things, through doing the wrong things, through wrong activities, through wrong behavior, through wrong ideas, through wrong thoughts, through wrong emotions, emotional outbursts, and so on and so forth. The rope gets weakened more and more and more until it ultimately becomes severed. That is the state of ultimate death. But each part of the rope, as each single strand is being cut, that strand is dead. That is what is called in biblical terms, that's what's the terminology used for it is karet, being cut off from God, being cut off from God. Now, without going into it in much detail, because I don't want to emphasize this part of it, but just to point out that even if a person is completely cut off, that means that his connection to God is cut off. It doesn't mean necessarily that God's connection to him or to her is cut off. God makes his choices about who he wants to have a relationship with. And it can often happen, that a person who's completely cut off, who's cut himself off from God, he or she obviously, has cut themselves off from God, might still be able to reconstitute that bond from above to below. In other words, because the person is still living and still existing in the world, it must mean that somehow or another God is connected to that person and therefore can be reestablished from that point of view. In other words, a two-way street. There's our connection to God, there's God's connection to us. We only have control over our connection to God. We don't have control over his connection to us, but we can reconstitute our connection through his connection. Okay, let's continue. Okay, so the Zohar now goes on to describe the eye of a person. It says there's three colors in the eye, three sections of the eye. There's the white of the eye, then the eyeball, then there's the iris. The iris is the colored part of the eye, where it could be brown, it could be green, it could be blue, and so on. the iris, and then there's the black part of the eye, the pupil, right? The pupil of the eye. Now, says the Zohar, these three colors of the eye correspond to the three patriarchs of the Jewish people, to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob. The white of the eye corresponds to Abraham. The color of the eye corresponds to, the iris corresponds to Isaac and the Yitzchak, and the black part of the eye, the pupil of the eye, corresponds to Jacob, to Yaakov. Okay, so the Zohar continues, and it says as follows. It says regarding these people that they are Rosh Bat Beit Avotam. They're the heads of the families from which the Jewish people descended. He then goes on, the Zohar then goes on to describe the pupil of the eye. What's the pupil of the eye called? The pupil of the eye is called Bat Ayin. Remember, we had that word before. You probably remember we had that word before. The word Bat, daughter. Bat Ayin, the daughter of the eye, is the dark part of the eye, the pupil. Okay, the dark part of the eye. Oh, I didn't show it to you. Sorry, I meant to. Let me get that up on the screen again. Let us share screen here. Share screen. Here we go. So again, the word bat, which is the bet and the taf over here, bat, daughter. When that word is combined with the word ayin, ayin, yud, nun, ayin. I'll just write it in quickly for you over here. Bat ayin. Let me make it a bit smaller. 1 second here. Yeah. Okay, so the word bat, ayin, right? Bat, ayin. Bat ayin is the pupil of the eye, bat ayin. Right, the pupil of the eye. So let's go back then to what we were talking about before. And the Zohar then continues and says like this. The bat ayin, the pupil of the eye, is a very small path. And this is the Shekhinah, the divine presence. It's the opening to the divine presence, regarding which it says in a verse, Shomreini ki ishon bat ayin. Guard me like the pupil of the eye, like the eyelid guards the pupil. I don't know if you know that in ancient times, one of the when a person was punished, sometimes in various various monarchs and rulers and things like that, in order to punish people, so they would cut off their eyelids. They would cut off their eyelids, and sometimes in certain cases when one nation was conquered by another one, as a sign of their submission, they had their eyelids cut off. Now you can imagine, never mind the pain of it, but you can imagine how uncomfortable it is that you can never actually close your eyes. Your eyes are always open. You can't close them. It must be terrible. In any event. So continues the Zohar. This is the secret of the word Bereshit. It's the word of Roshi Bat. As we said before, when we were talking about it before, we said that that was the word Roshi Bat, right? My head and Bat. Bat, in other words, my daughter. So what are we talking about over here? We're talking, says the Zohar, about the Bat Ayin. We're talking about the pupil of the eye. The pupil of the eye is the opening into the head, Roshi, my head. But what does that mean, that the pupil of the eye is the opening? As we said before, the concept is, I'm sorry, I thought I was sharing the screen, I wasn't. The Bat Ayin, the pupil of the eye, is the opening into the head. Now, it's the opening into the mind, and it's the opening ultimately into the soul. So let's understand what this means. When the Zohar says what we have to do is we have to make sure that we only look in the right places, what does that mean? So the Zohar goes on to describe that one of the things that Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, that's the author of the Zohar, the Rashbi, one of the things that he said was that he himself would meditate upon, and he would visualize in his mind, certain permutations of one of the divine names. I don't want to go into it now because it's not really our, it's not necessary to be able to understand what we're talking about and why we are doing what we are doing. So, says the Zohar, it goes on and it explains as follows. It says like this: the eye, the pupil of the eye, is the entrance to the mind and ultimately to the soul. So what one has to do is make sure that that pupil of the eye is protected properly, that it has these angels, in other words, your eyelids in this particular case, the way the Zohar is explaining it, protecting and preventing you from seeing things which you shouldn't see. Now, what are the kinds of things that we shouldn't see? Well, one of the things that we shouldn't look at is what is called erva. Erva means nakedness. It's not proper to look at a person's nakedness, another person's nakedness, or even your own for that matter. If it's, your own is a little bit different, but one should not look at the nakedness of another person. Now, that's meant literally a person's physical nakedness. A man shouldn't be looking at lewd pictures or pictures of women and so on and so on. Women should be looking at pictures of naked pictures of men and so on. But it also means that not only in a physical sense, and that's very important. Believe me, I'm not discrediting or discounting it at all. Very important thing, because that leads to all kinds of desires, and it leads to not that we're unfamiliar with them, but these things have to be done in a holy way. Conjugal issues have to be conducted in the proper way, in the proper time, with the proper love, and it's not just lust. Lust is one of the words that's used to describe one of the words that Alcoholics Anonymous uses to describe alcoholism. It's a lust for alcohol. Similarly, when it comes to sexual matters, there can be a lust for sexual things, which is not a positive thing. Lust is never a positive thing. Desire, yes. Desire can be a holy thing. Lust is not holy. Lust is, I gotta have it no matter what. It's an addiction. Okay, let's leave that aside for a moment, and that's a very important thing, and we should all be aware of it. But looking at the nakedness of a person is uncovering not only their physical bodies, but it could also be uncovering certain aspects of their personality that one shouldn't look at. Certain weaknesses that a person may have should not be emphasized and should not be examined and should not be looked at. This is one of the, by the way, I know there's a couple of psychologists on the listening in here and participating, this is one of the ideas, I think, that is somewhat dangerous in psychology. I'm sorry, just let me turn that off. Okay. Looking into a person's weaknesses and bringing them to the fore, bringing out those weaknesses and presenting a person with his weaknesses is a thing that classical psychology was very familiar with. It's not always a good thing. In fact, very often it's a negative thing. Confronting one's weaknesses does not make one a stronger person. Confronting one's bad character traits, confronting one's bad actions from the past is not always a good thing. Most often it's destructive and negative. Now, I'm not dissing psychiatrists and psychologists. I'm not dissing them at all. But that is the view that the Zohar is propounding. Much better when we look at a person to close your eyes to those things and open your eyes to the positive qualities that a person has. Open up your eyes to the beautiful things that a person has. There's a story which is told about one of the great sages, Rabbi Eliezer, very, very great sage of Talmudic times. And he had given a class that morning, which he was very, very proud of, apparently. And he was flying high, so to speak. Even great sages sometimes make mistakes. And he made this mistake. He allowed it to go to his head. He allowed the accolades he got from the class that he gave, which was, I'm sure, an excellent class, but he allowed it to go to his head. He's on his way home, and as he's riding down the path on his donkey, he sees another fellow coming in the opposite direction towards him, who happens to be exceptionally ugly. Exceptionally ugly. So Rabbi Eliezer said to him, "What an ugly fellow you are." Now, this may seem very hard. Obviously, someone wants to get hold of me here. If he calls again, I'm going to have to pick up the phone. It's probably very important. Okay. Okay, so he said to him, "What an ugly fellow you are." Now, Rebbe Eliezer was a great sage, and when he said that, he obviously saw that the ugly qualities the ugly physical qualities were a result of ugly spiritual qualities, qualities of character, or spiritual qualities. Now, you probably know that sometimes a person can be not so beautiful physically, but they shine with a light from inside, and they look beautiful, even though they may not be physically all that appealing and all that attractive. This person was physically not attractive, and he did not shine, to put it mildly, he did not shine with an inner light. So when Rebbe Eliezer saw this, he said to him, "You're an ugly person." Why was he saying it to him? To hurt him? No. He was telling him, fix your ways, do something about it, improve yourself. But in fact, that ugly person that he saw was not just a regular, ordinary person. It was somebody who was being sent to test Rabbi Eliezer, to give him a lesson. He had given a beautiful lesson, and now he was being taught a beautiful lesson. The man said to him, or the man was actually Elijah the prophet, who sometimes comes in disguise, Eliyahu Hanavi. The man said to him, "Go and tell that to my maker. Go and tell that to the person, to the one who created me," not the person, the one who created me, God. "Go and tell that to God who created me, that I am ugly." And Rebbe Eliezer suddenly realized what he'd said. And he was very contrite and very apologized and so on and so forth. He said, "You're absolutely right," and so on. The story teaches us that sometimes we look at the nakedness of a person, we look at their negative qualities, we look at what makes them ugly rather than what makes them beautiful. Every person, no matter who it is, has some quality which in some way or another is a redeeming feature. Perhaps not every person, but almost every person. I'm sure there must be some exception, people who are so evil that they have no redeeming qualities anymore. That could be. But the average person, especially those who are close to us, are not mass murderers. They're not mass rapists, serial rapists and things like that. They're just people who have faults and foibles of human beings who need a little bit of correction, sometimes a lot of correction. You know, they need a Tikun. They need to be lifted up. They need to be taught how to bring out the beautiful things from inside them. So, this is what the Zohar is telling us here. The Zohar is telling us, close your eyes if you want your eyes to be the gateways of righteousness, of holiness. Learn when to close your eyes, physically and in a spiritual sense. Close your eyes so that you don't see things that you shouldn't see, and open your eyes to those things which are holy, which are right, which are good, which are beautiful. Similarly, in a spiritual sense, close your eyes to other people's faults and foibles. Focus more on their positive qualities and bring those out of them. And those will automatically, if you do it right, will automatically start to flood the negative qualities and drown them. So that eventually the negative qualities will not be visible anymore to that extent. Okay, I'm just going to address a few texts over here. As a matter of trying, including passion, interest, and commitment in each corner, we see with all the three beauty and truth emerges. Yeah. With all three, beauty and freedom and truth emerges. Yeah. Nicely put. Diana said, you're right. We often look at the outer of a person and fail to see the inner beauty that God gave them. Exactly. And that is what the Zohar is talking about over here. Now, the Zohar then goes on to say as follows. The Zohar goes on to call that bat, which we said was the bat eye in the pupil of the eye through which a person sees. When a person goes blind, God forbid, it's the dark part of the eye that becomes light. It loses its color, it loses its darkness, and you can see that the person's blind. Yes? Okay, so the Zohar calls that bat ayin. He said, why is it called bat ayin, the daughter of the eye, literally? Why is the people called the daughter of the eye? Because it is the Sphira of Malchut. It's the Sphira of Malchut. Here we go. The Sphira of Malchut, the final Sphira. This final Sphira. Which is the Sphira through which all the rest of the Sphirot channel their energy. In other words, in order for the upper Sphirot, and particularly the Roshei HaSphirot, we said Roshi means my head, which is either Keter, Chochma, Bina, Keter, Chochma, and Bina. Keter, the crown, the highest of the Sphirot, Chochma, or which is usually translated as wisdom, Bina, understanding. Those three Sphirot are called the Rosh. They're called the head. Sometimes we talk about them in terms of the three brains, Chochma, Bina, and Da'at. Chochma, the right brain, Bina, the left brain, and Da'at, the medulla, the back of the brain, which becomes the spinal cord and reaches all the way down, right? So those three brains, that's sometimes called the Rosh. But in any event, the opening to the head, the opening to these things, and of course, therefore, all of everything else as well, the opening is through Malchut. Malchut is the daughter. In Kabbalah, Chochma is called the father, Bina is called the mother, and these six Sphirot from Chesed to Yesod, Chesed, Gvura, Tiferet, Netzach, Hod, Yesod, are called the son, and this is called the daughter. Malchut is called the daughter. So Roshi Bat. In other words, the daughter, Malchut, is the way to get to the head. Meaning to say, what is Malchut? Malchut is the lowest of the Sphirot, but it in fact is, at the same time, it is the highest of the Sphirot. Malchut and Keter are intimately and integrally related. Keter is literally the crown, and Malchut, literally translated, means kingdom. So the crown and kingdom, as we can understand, are completely related one to the other. Okay, the crown and the kingdom are related. In fact, you find this in literature, that when one refers to, when one's talking about the king, you don't always call him the king or the queen, you call him the crown. right? The crown. The crown is the kingdom. That's what it represents. Okay, so the key to all of the Sfirot, therefore, is Malchut. Malchut, however, is the outermost layer of the Sfirot. The Sfirot go in layers. This is the top layer, the very top layer, the innermost layer. The next layer is the brain. The next layer are the emotional qualities. The final layer is Malchut. Malchut being the origin of thought, speech, and deed. Thought as opposed to mind, right? That Chokhmah is mind, Chokhmah being our mind, Malchut is thought. These are called the garments of the soul. Thought, speech, and action are the garments of the soul. So, in order to be able to get to the inner person and relate to the inner person, that comes about through Malchut. It comes about through the three garments of thought, speech, and action. Examining the person's actions, but only looking at those things which are positive about the person. Speech, yes, people sometimes use the wrong kinds of words, but what is it that they're saying? Let's listen to what it is that they're trying to say. Don't look at the words as much as look at the content. Look at the positive things and teach your children, teach yourself, teach the people you come into contact with to speak properly, to speak kindly, to talk about the good things. There's an exercise which is done, a very good exercise, very positive exercise, which is to think about a person who you have some kind of negative relationship with, and just state think about it for a long time before you state them, but 3 good qualities about that person. 3 good things. You state it out. If you state it with your mouth, you bring it into reality. In fact, it's brought down in Kabbalah, and particularly in Hasidic writings, that the whole concept of praising God is in order to bring out those qualities. So we call God kind and merciful and so on and so forth. That brings out those qualities from above. It manifests them from above. Same thing is true of human beings. In order to manifest the qualities of a human being, so you bring them out. You have to learn how to bring them out properly. Now, when your kid comes home from school, and he got he did well on his test, the way to say that is not, oh, you're so smart, but, oh, you worked so hard, and look at the result. Such a great result. The kid will feel that I did something. It's not that I am something, but that I did something. It's achievable. It's not something you're either born with or you're not born with. It's not something that closes you up. There's a book that's well worth reading if you're interested in this concept, which is called Mindset, by a woman named Carol Dweck, a psychologist, I believe from the University of California, if I'm not mistaken. I may be wrong there, but Carol Dweck is her name, D-W-E-C-K, and she wrote a book called Mindset, and Mindset is a very important book. It's the beginning stages. There's more to say about that idea than she says in the book, at least according to Kabbalah, there's much more. But that mindset is to give people a positive mindset, is to not praise them for what they are, but for what they do, for what they can achieve, and so on, or what they have achieved, and so on. So in any event, to bring out the good things in a person, it's useful to speak them out, to say them, or to write them for that matter. That's the Malchut aspect of things. And therefore the Zohar concludes, Bezot Yavo Aharon El HaKodesh. This is what Bezot, Malchut has a nickname, it's called Zot, the female definite article. Zot means this, right? This, with this, Aaron comes into the Holy of Holies. With this concept of knowing how to look at other people, knowing how to look at them from the positive point of view, looking at their positive qualities, looking at the godliness within them, looking at the positive things they've done, or that at least, even if they haven't done them yet, but they could do in the future, even if they haven't done them yet, and use that as a way to enter into their souls, in a sense, enter into their Holy of Holies and bring out these qualities for their benefit. Okay, so that is the Tikun of this week. And if there are any questions, I'd be happy to take them. Yeah, the brainstem, yeah, that was the medulla, I think it's called, yeah, the brainstem, yeah. Medulla oblongata, I think it's called, that's the... All right, any other questions? Okay, so just to sum up, thought, speech, and action, yeah, right. Just to sum up, the Reshit Bat, says the Zohar, is first of all knowing what to open your eyes to and knowing what to close your eyes to. And that is the path, the gateway to righteousness. It's the gateway to becoming a holy person and making others around you righteous and holy as well. And it is essentially through looking at the positive things in a person's thought, speech, and deeds, thoughts, speech, and deeds, and using that as a way into to see the positive and the beautiful in that person's soul, and that improves things. Thought, speech, and action. How do we cleanse them? How do we cleanse them? Well, that in itself is a whole course, and perhaps we should do that one of these days. Talking about cleansing the garments of thought, speech, and deed. There's a lot to talk about over there, but just in a nutshell, to always focus on the positive and good things, and when the mind is focused on negative things, just to bring it gently back to think about positive things. The mind can only really think about one thing at a time, at least consciously. So think about the good things. Think of, have a storehouse of things that you change your mind with. You change your way of thinking. In other words, everyone's thinking, let's say, lewd thoughts or lusty thoughts or whatever, things like that. Just for example, there could be anything, other negative things. Recall a positive encounter with a spiritually more advanced person, or a holy person, if you know such a person, or some such thing. Or if you can learn, let's say, a psalm by heart, and you learn to say it and try and visualize the words, or try and visualize the picture that the psalm is painting, that can take one's mind off things like that, and so on and so forth. Worst comes to worst, get up and walk away, and just focus on something else. Start talking or reading something out loud. That very often can take the mind off such things. What word is used when God says that David is the apple of his eye? I forget the exact verse that you're talking about, but it's I think it's called Bat Eno. That's what it is. The daughter of his eye. There are people who complain about everything. What can one do? Oh, that is... Yeah, that's a very common problem. People who complain. So the first thing to do, I think, this is my opinion. You can ask some professionals, but my opinion is when people are very, very, very critical, the trick is to ask them, to get them to think about something positive. So you may just have to say about, if someone's, let's say, being critical about another person. Like Rabbi Eliezer was being critical about that ugly man that he saw. What did the ugly man say? He's addressed it directly. Well, tell my maker. That's why don't you tell the creator, he who created me? But you can approach it slightly differently. You can say, I'm sure that person has some redeeming features. What about this thing? What about this aspect? What about that? You have to teach them how to look at the good things. There's a... there used to be, unfortunately, he passed away, a very, very a person who was very extremely true to himself, and he was very like a really truthful, honest, down-to-earth person, but he was also a very earthy person. And he would, his name was Reuven Dunan, Allah Shalom. He passed away quite a few years ago already, but he was a person that just got to the heart of the matter. So he was once giving a what's called a Verbrengen. A Verbrengen means when people gather together and they have sort of a chew the fat session, or someone, a spiritual leader, gives an insight into something. I should show you sometime. I'll show you maybe a short video of parts of the Verbrengen or whatever, just to give you an example. But it's a spiritual gathering. It's a gathering of people together where they sing, and they could be eating and drinking, sing l'chaim, a little bit of alcohol or whatever, but wishing each other well and so on. Anyway, he was in charge of it. He was Verbrengen. He was saying something. He was so he said as follows. He said, there was once a king. This is an analogy, right? A metaphor. There was once a king that built a beautiful, beautiful palace. A new palace, beautiful palace. And he very much wanted, he was a very kind person and kind to his subjects. He wanted his subjects to be able to see what they paid for, right? They paid for the palace. He was the king. But obviously the subjects are the one, taxes and so on. They paid for the palace. And he wanted them to see it, but you can't invite everyone in the whole state to see the palace. So what are you going to do? You invite the newspaper reporters and the TV crews and so on and so forth. And you get them to give them a tour of the palace, and they take all the photographs and the videos and so on and so forth, and they post it in their newspapers, online, whatever. I'm using modern metaphors, right? Then people see the beauty of that. Everybody could see, what's beautiful, the beauty of the palace. Okay, so there was a certain day that all the reporters were told to come to the palace, and they all came, and they were going to give them a guided tour. One of the reporters said, "I'm not going to go on the guided tour that they give, because they're only going to show us what they want us to see. I want to look at what I want to look at. Yes? I want to look at things that interest me." So what did he do? Well, everyone went on the guided tour, and they saw the beautiful tapestries and the paintings and the furnishings and the so on and so forth, the opulence of the beautiful opulence of the palace and the throne room and the etc., 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 etc. This fellow went down to the basement, and he went to start looking in the pipes. And you know what floats in the pipes, right? That's where he looked every day. The next day, everybody, all the newspaper reporters had their beautiful pictures in the newspapers and online, and so on and so forth, and videos. And he showed pictures of what flows through the pipes. And that was the analogy that he gave, right? So think about it. You could look at what flows through the pipes, and everyone has that. Or you could look at the beauty of the palace. You choose what you want to look at. The Zohar suggests that what you should look at is the beauty. Whether it's the outer beauty, the inner beauty, and so on and so forth. Don't look in those places that are forbidden. But don't look at the nakedness of a person. Don't look at his negative qualities or her negative qualities. Look at the good things and bring them out. And you'd be surprised, perhaps one of the ways to do this, Gloria asked this question, one of the ways to do this might be to look for the good qualities in that person that's complaining and start to bring those good qualities out. You're a kind, you're a generous person, whatever it may happen to be. I know there's got to be some good qualities somewhere. You might have to do a bit of work to find what they are, but nevertheless, start talking about that person's good qualities. And perhaps that'll change their whole way of looking at things. Maybe the reason that they are the way they are is because that was the way they were always looked at. They were always criticized and become critical. They were always looked down upon, so they look down upon others. And if you start to look for the good qualities, it could be that that'll change the whole attitude that the person has. I hope that's the meaning of Terry's embrace rather than defend the complaint, right? Embrace it, in other words, embrace the complainer, let's put it that way, rather than the complaint itself. Embrace the complaint and bring out his or her positive qualities. Okay, are there any other questions? Okay, I think we'll stop here. There'll be a class again next week, I hope, Thursday night, and see you then. All the best.